Good morning, everyone. Yeah, feeling good? Looking good as usual. Show of hands, who loves good Mexican food? Yeah, same here, same here. So, really good friend of ours, one of my best friends. He, about 6 to 8 months ago, opened a Mexican restaurant in Irvin, which is relatively close there, right? Yeah, so show him some business. I can get you connected with him. It's called Tequila. So I was debating on whether I should drop the name in church or not, but it is what it is. Once you get there, that's what it's named. So, it is, but it's great. I'm a little biased, but I think he has one of the best flavors, if not the best flavor around. It's phenomenal. So we're over there some time ago, and it's not too busy, so he's like, hey, come help me. So I go back, and we go into the kitchen, and this pot of beans that we carry, I mean, the circumference is like this to make refried beans. It was huge. And then he says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to wait on a table. And I'm like, okay, I got this. Give me the little notebook thingy. So he gives me the little pad or whatever it's called, gives me a pen, and he says, go wait on them. And he points to my family. So I go over to my family, and it's like, all right, take their orders. And I'm like, okay, what do you all want? And he was like, no. You got to be gentle. And I'm like, oh, how y'all doing today? Is everything right? And he was like, get their drinks, and then I'm short on service, short on staff, go get chips. So I'm like, okay, that sounds simple, but in my mind I'm like, okay, it's getting a little cloudy here. So I take the drink order, I go put that in, and then it's like, no, you don't just swipe the ticket up there. You have to go get the drinks. Then you come back, bring the chips, get their order, then you take that part of the ticket back too. And I'm like, dude, I came here to eat. We're friends. What is all this right here? So I start going through the motions, and I come to take the orders of these people that I have lived with for years, and I'm taking their orders, and I'm like, I'm nervous. Like, I'm writing it down, and my hand is shaking, and I guess you can see that the writing on the ticket here is awful, and I'm getting a little confused, and I know what they like. I could order for them, but listening to them do it in that real time, so I get that, I take it back to the kitchen, hang it up, and then I'm going to go sit down, and it's like, no, they need drinks. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We just got here. So I go over, and they need drinks. So the order's ready, and I get this buzz, and he's like, yeah, come back here. I go get the food, and I'm thinking, is he going to do one of those things where it's just stacked all up, and I'm walking out like this? So it's like, no, take 2 or 3 chips. You're new. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get it. So I get a chip, take them out. Then I'm like, y'all need anything? And he's like, no, gentle. I'm like, does everything look good and all this? And the whole time I'm walking through this, I'm thinking, this looks so easy when you're seated and somebody comes and says, hey, you want some drinks? What do you want to drink? What do you want to eat? And I'm going through this routine, and in my mind I walk away from this experience thinking, there is no way on this planet that I could get good enough at that to do it. Anybody else's watch talk to them? So I'm thinking, there's no way on this planet that I could get good enough to really be successful at that. And then I walk away from this experience, and I actually take a few notes, and here's what I write down. I'm thinking, David, you are not cut out for this. And that's okay. You're not wired to think like this. You're not wired to balance these intricacies. Now, when it comes to the church, oh yeah, you love it. You can excel in that. But when it comes to this dynamic, it's different. So I started watching service, and I'm blown away at what they can balance. Now, here's why that's important. You're probably thinking, okay, what's the big deal, right? Well, we've been walking through this series called The Church Defined, and we're hanging our hat on this one particular verse in Acts, which is the book right after the Gospels and the life of Jesus, that starts telling us about the unfolding life of local churches. So this guy, Luke, who writes Acts, he looks at the landscape of all these freshly baptized disciples and says, what are they doing over the course of time? How are they gathering? What's the focal point? And that's how we're defining church. And Acts 2:42 says, those several thousand people who were baptized into the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who became disciples of Jesus like they were supposed to. The apostles were to make disciples. They're doing that. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to prayer and to the breaking of bread. And this morning, we're going to look at fellowship. Now, if you're anything like me, you hear the word fellowship, and I think styrofoam plates, red Solo cups, Potluck. Just a side note here. The team that takes care of our potlucks, are they phenomenal or what? Show them some love. Oh my goodness. We've had 2 since I've been here, and they are setting the bar every time. So we'll get in touch with you when it's time for round 3, and we'll just keep doing it, okay? It's phenomenal. So thank you, everyone behind the scenes involved in that. They're just great. That's what I think of when I hear the word fellowship. But as we looked at last week, that dynamic is a little closer related to the breaking of bread. The idea of fellowship it underscores the idea of mutual participation. It's not just that you're here. It's not just that you're connected. You are interconnected. And it's not just that you're here. You're here for a purpose. In other words, you individually, the rest of the body needs you. We're better when you're here. We thrive when all of us get together. And not just here, we're not just connected, we're interconnected. It's mutual participation. And when we explore this verse, we're trying to see, as Acts unfolds, what are the stories that are reinforcing this Acts 2:42 kind of community? What's the stories that's reinforcing this as the church begins to expand? And it's kind of neat to see how Madison Hills is beginning to expand. And then how can we harness what's going on in Acts and apply that here? So that's how we're walking through this series, The Church Defined. So if you flip over to Acts chapter 6, something really cool happens. There's this phrase, and it simply says, in those days. And if you're a reader like me, when I read those words, I'm like, well, what days? So there's been a little bit of conflict and tension from the outside world toward the church. So it could be that, but Luke qualifies, and he says, in those days, when the number of disciples was increasing. So the place is getting a little bigger. And the people start feeling it. So there's this tension. You can read about this later. Suffice it now to say, they had this crazy cool food ministry going on. And there were some people from different backgrounds, and it looked like some of the people were getting overlooked in like this daily distribution of food. So there's a little complaining that pops up. But I don't want you to focus on that. I don't want you to focus on that because I think this idea points to a bigger problem. So you read through the text and there's some complaining because it looks as if a certain group is being overlooked. Now, I don't know about you, but it would be easy to read that and say, oh, that's a problem, right? People are complaining, there's overlooked. No. I think this points to a bigger problem, a bigger issue, something that maybe they weren't prepared to deal with, and now they've got to deal with it in the moment. In those days, the number of disciples was increasing. They hadn't experienced this before. Some of this was new. It was a new dynamic. It was a new season of growth, and they were feeling it. So the need that some people were literally being overlooked in the daily distribution of food, that's a real need. And the people saw it. They felt it. They knew it. So what's happening? Well, it wasn't like they were doing it intentionally necessarily. That's just the way it was working as they began to grow. So I think this complaining and overlook, it's a practical problem, but it points to something. It points to a deeper issue. They're getting bigger. They're growing, so they're going to experience growing pains. So in the real-time moment, they're going to be required to make some adjustments real time. It's almost like you get any group of people together, any organization, and you start to grow a little bit, and then you realize, hey, we didn't know that was an issue. Hey, we didn't know that was a problem. Hey, we didn't know we needed to put time or money or resources here. So you begin to experience this stuff, and you make those real-time adjustments. Now, the apostles are aware of what's going on here, and they're going to make an assessment of this that I hope you and I can commit to embracing. I mean, I think we've got to embrace what they do. So they look at everything that's going on, and here's what the 12, those apostles, notice their assessment. So they gather all the disciples together to talk about this, have this big team meeting, this big huddle, maybe a town hall kind of thing. They're getting everybody together, right? And notice what they say, the 12, it would not be right. I mean, did you pump the brakes on that? You're like, wait, did I read that wrong? It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of the word to serve or to wait on tables. Now, caveat here, we're not talking about bigger or better, higher or lower. That is not the idea here. There is no contrast between, hey, this is really important and this is not so important. That's not the deal. Why would it be wrong, or why wouldn't it be right for these 12 to neglect anything that would take them away from the ministry of the word? Because they were the guys that Jesus tapped on the shoulder a few weeks ago and said, I want you all to go and make disciples, baptize those people, and then you teach them everything I've been teaching you. You see the principles start to unfold. There are some people who need to be doing some stuff, and that's what they need to be doing. And no dynamic needs to draw them away from that. So they're like, we know what Jesus told us to do. We can't allow anything to cause us to neglect that. That's powerful, isn't it? That is a dynamic, a concept that we must embrace. Here's why. It empowers other people. It gets more people involved. It gets you involved in areas that God has tapped you on the shoulder and said, you need to be doing this. You need to be involved in this area. And then it gives us a collective sense of culture that, yeah, that's who we are at Madison Hills. People are mutual participants. They're part of the fellowship. They're interconnected. Your presence here is not only expected, and it's not expected just because we're counting numbers. You're really important to the kingdom of God and locally here at Madison Hills. This is a phenomenal thing. So you like Purdy's. I love Purdy's. I've told you that before. The one on Big Hill, is that right? I'm still learning the landscape a little bit. It's great, but this place on Main Street, oh my gosh, I love it. The aesthetic in there, it's phenomenal. So there's a guy, he and I, we meet once, twice. We try to work in twice a month there. We usually go upstairs to this area they call the loft. And it's kind of a smaller room, got this great industrial looking table there. We'll spend about an hour there. We're just talking shop. So we met a couple of days ago, hanging out, catching up, just great conversation. And then he starts talking to me a little bit about the church experience. And we're talking about what a follower of Jesus is supposed to do. And then his language shifts just a little bit. And he starts talking about feeling pressured to do certain things. And I'm like, this is a really good conversation. Now listen a little bit more, and then he talks about some of the pressure that he's receiving to do certain things because he's a follower of Jesus. And then his question to me, looks across the table and he says, do I have to do that? That's a really good question. For decades, especially like in the 70s and the 80s, us pastors would stand up on a stage and passionately present a message, almost guilt-tripping people to serve in certain areas because stuff wasn't getting done. And over time, some very perceptive pastors started leaning into this and saying, wait a minute, is that really the design in the New Testament? Is that really what we see happening with the disciples as they began to expand and put these churches up? And it's a phenomenal experience when these 12 come along and say, it's not right for us to neglect this for this. And I bet there was some tension because this was a real need. Some people were being overlooked, but they weren't the ones to fill that spot. That's powerful. So what happens? Well, they look at the landscape and they say, you know what? We need to get some guys to solve this. And if you love leadership or structure of organizations, this is one of your go-to passages because they do something neat. The party that felt this the most, the party that was complaining, and again, I don't think we read that necessarily negatively. I think it's just indicative of a different issue that's occurring, the one that they need to solve, and the apostles pick up on this. It would be so easy for those 12, don't you think, to step in and say, we're the apostles. We'll deal with this conflict. We're the leaders, and we'll deal with it ourselves. But they don't. They actually take a step back, and they talk to the ones who are bringing this issue to the table, and they're like, hey, you choose 7 people to solve this. And then the language around it is phenomenal. But if you love the leadership and structure, maybe you have your hands in your own business or whatever, this is powerful. if there's a problem being brought to you, those are the people who have identified that this is an issue. What are we going to do about it? Those may be individuals who are best equipped to help not only provide awareness of the problem, but potential solutions to it as well. This is awesome. So the 12, they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Choose 7 men, and notice the language, known to be full of wisdom, full of the Spirit, and we'll turn this responsibility over to them. I love that. Here's a need. Let's get the right people to fill that. Let's get the right people to step into that. Let's make sure that we're expanding this idea of fellowship where there is mutual participation and more people are getting involved. And not just because of a guilt trip, but people who are known to be X, Y, and Z. People who are known to be this and that. People who are known to be full of wisdom and the Spirit and can really make a difference in this particular area. Is that super cool or what? And I think that's where we are at Madison Hills. We've got some growth going on. And I think there will probably be times, because I don't know if I feel it right now, but there will probably be times in the coming months or maybe the coming years when those growing pains, we start to feel them. And it's not that there's a problem. The issue is that we're growing and there's growing pains and there'll need to be real-time adjustments. And one of the real-time adjustments is getting the right people to serve in the right areas and empowering people to serve in those areas. Fair? Makes sense so far? So I bet you've heard this before. If you've been around the church for a while, this is not original with me. It's just a great tool. It's a great catalyst for this kind of change when it comes to the idea of serving or being a mutual participant. If you're new to church, this is a great thing, and maybe it'll be very helpful for you in navigating your place here at Madison Hills. But we call it SHAPE. And we put responsibility on people to really identify what their spiritual gift is. And you can start to identify, like, what's your best equipped to do? Where I need to bounce around there in Madison Hills and really serve, or where I need to step in and say, you know what, this is a great spot for me because I can't neglect this. This is part of who I am and how God is tapping me on the shoulder and saying, hey, this is who you are. This is how I've wired you to serve. So SHAPE, your spiritual gift, can be reflective of your heart. And you know, as a pastor, you let me in to the behind the scenes setup of your lives a lot of times. And I get to listen to your heart. And it's so interesting to listen to some of the stories or the things that bug you and bother you, because those are a reflection of what's going on in here and what's important to you. And maybe you're a great point person because you see something's off. And you're known to be. And we can turn this responsibility over to you. This is a great dynamic. So your heart, what just bothers you? And I know some people like this language, some people don't. I'm kind of partial to it because it makes sense and clicks in my mind. But do I ask the question, what just wrecks you at times? You find yourself really thinking about this. You're caught up. There's a problem over here and you just can't shake it. You're anything like me, there's some problems you're like, okay, big deal. But this over here, this has my attention. I'm captivated. I get this. What's got your heart? What wrecks you and what bothers you? Then A, your ability. Really, what can you do? What are you good at? It's amazing to me at how we can take these things that we would just call natural gifts, natural abilities, just things that we do. We're just good at something. And then it's so easy to detach that from the ministry of the church. When really that ability that you have, and maybe you were born with it, it's just part of who you are, always has been. You have stories going on in your mind at times where your parents are like, oh yeah, she's so good at. Oh yeah, he's always been so good at. And the teachers have always said that about you. And then you went to secondary education and just crushed it. And maybe you're in a job and your boss is always like, oh yeah, if you need somebody to handle this, it's that, just that natural ability you have. That gets baptized with you. And God can use that in his kingdom. And then P, and this is really important when it comes to a local church because it starts to reflect that idea of mutual participation where we're a team. and we're on the same team, but your personality. Your personality. And some people, they are super in some areas, but their personality pulls them away from other areas. Like really, your personality, is it a good fit for certain areas? And this right here, you're going to hear a lot more about this dynamic here in January. But suffice it now to say, this is just a good intro for us to start to sort out this idea of fellowship. So in E, your experience. This is where we really talk about your life experience. Even the bad stuff. I think I've told you before about growing up in this small community in Harlan County called Loyal. And in the center of it, there was a grade school that I went to. I graduated 8th grade there. Phenomenal place. I miss that. Do you have any nostalgia going on? Is that just me right now? I don't know what it is, but I'm so caught up. On Facebook, I follow all these 80s channels and pages, and I just love it. And it's a throwback. I'm having these memories about a fall fest, kind of like the thing we're going to have next week, but at this school, and they would do such a good job with it, and the cakewalks and all that junk. Just, I don't know, I'm about to tear up right now. Like, that's just good stuff. So I grew up in this little community, and I've told you before that my first child was born as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, and I did so as a dad in high school. So my experience with having a child out of marriage, my experience with being a dad in high school, my experience with a blended family has opened so many doors for me to step inside of someone's life and say, you know what, this is tough. And right now it's a really big deal. But I've been there. And here's how we can get through this. So I'm in the area where that school is, and adjacent to the right here is the local post office, and people just whip in there really quick. And I see this young guy, just a super good guy, one of those young guys, but just struggles to get on his feet. And he's a younger guy. He would mow lawns through the summer and all of that stuff. I see him, and he usually had a little pep in his step. Like he was one of these guys who would walk like this, right? So I see this guy, and you can just see his shoulders sagging. And it's like a slump, and he's walking like this. So I just whip in, like we always do, and I roll down the window, and I'm like, hey, man, what's up? I haven't seen you in a while. He's like, I just got a lot going on. I'm like, what's going on? And he was like, well, you know, I'm busted, and my girlfriend's pregnant. And I kid you not, in those moments, I'm like, I got this. Yes, I can't wait on tables. I can't take orders. But this right here, so I reach over, open the door, push it open. I'm like, hop in, man, if you got time. And he gets in, and then we're allowed to do some really good work in that. Your experience, and not just your education, your life education. Some of the stuff you've been through sets you up to serve in some really powerful ways that'll move people forward. This is important. You see what's happening here, right? And this is all God's design, and God is getting people involved in this. And it'll be really practical here in just a moment. But when you're talking about spiritual gifts, and I really want to just give you a couple of broad strokes with this that we'll talk more as the year unfolds and then in the new year. But there's two big passages in your New Testament when the idea of spiritual gifts shows up. One is in Romans 12, one's in 1 Corinthians 12, and they're back-to-back books, Acts, Romans, 1 Corinthians. So chapter 12 of both books, and you read about them, and Paul uses this metaphor of a body. And he'll use this metaphor of a body and say, a church is like a body. There's one body, but there's many members to it. And not all the members have the same function or responsibility. And some you can see, and some you can't. But they're all necessary, and they're all important, and they're vital to the health of this body. This is a great metaphor. So when he uses this metaphor, the Apostle Paul uses this metaphor, he usually uses it in connection with one's shape, their spiritual gift. And he talks a little bit about the spiritual gifts and the design, like in Romans 12. And I don't know what version of Bible you read from, but if you've got the NIV and you have the dated NIV from like the 70s, there's this great phrase that's inserted there. And some of the gifts, these come from Romans 12, are like serving and teaching and encouraging. And notice the broad strokes that they are, like serving. That's broad. How? Well, there's multiple ways to serve, and it depends on your shape. So wisdom is another one. There's just these great lists. But in the NIV, if you have it, there's this phrase that says, if a man's gift is teaching, or if one's gift is encouraging, let them. And I've always loved that language. Let them. Don't get in the way. Make room for them to serve. Turn this responsibility over to them because they are known for this. They're a mutual participant. This is a really big deal, and it's not our design. This isn't some new church model or church strategy. This is embedded in the development of the church and the church defined. 1 Corinthians 12, he also uses the metaphor of the body there. And there's a couple of things that have been around church way too long to know that these are so real. These are not just things we're putting on the screen right now. These two statements here, I've heard them. And I've heard them multiple times. And I've heard them from people, not here at Madison Hills yet, but I've heard them from people that would surprise you that they actually feel this way. So using the metaphor of the body, Paul would say there's two attitudes that easily pop up into someone's heart and mind when you're talking about them belonging or being a mutual participant. He says one is there's this feeling that since I'm not like you, I don't belong. And I would bet a lot of somebody else's money that right now, some of you feel that. I wondered if you'd catch that. Yeah, I was wondering if you'd catch that. I bet some of you feel that right now. You're still sorting through here. You're still sorting through your place at Madison Hills. And maybe you look around and you're like, you know what? I'm different. I'm an ear. It's like they're all eyes. So do I belong? And the resounding answer is yes. Not just because I'm saying so, but because this is the church defined the way God has defined it. And then some people look around, and this is where the arrogancy slips in sometimes. Some people look around like, well, you're not like me, so I don't need you. Isn't that amazing that some of the body parts that you and I need most can't even be seen? And they're the most vital. And when you read in that Acts 6 passage, it's really interesting because the names of those 7 guys who this responsibility for the daily distribution of food, those 7 guys that this ministry is turned over to, their names are listed. And I challenge you to go back and read those names and then show me where else in the New Testament they're listed. Because most of them, you never hear about them again. But look at the good work they're doing. So we need you. We definitely need you. And you definitely belong. Clear on that? So here's why I fully believe in this dynamic. Some time ago, I was introduced to a book, and I don't even know if I finished the book because I got caught up in this diagram that this guy had listed. And it caught my attention. I started thinking about it. And when I first read it, I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. You know, do you ever read something like that and you're like, there's something there that sounds good, that makes sense, but I'm not sure if I fully agree with it. So I started wrestling with it, and then standing here before you today, I'm fully convinced. This is definitely accurate. And we can throw out probably 10 right now, off the cuff Bible verses that would back this up. But historically, the church has been a place where God gives this very powerful vision to the pastor. And then the pastor comes and casts that really cool vision to the people. And that worked. Especially worked in the days of Moses, when he would go away and hang out and then come back to the people with these 2 big tablets and say, this is what God has said to me and what I need to say to you all. But you fast forward to the 1st century where Jesus starts walking around and creating this idea of discipleship and making disciples. And you read through the passages like Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12, and you hear language and phraseology like the Holy Spirit chooses who gets what gifts. And every single follower of Jesus receives a gift. Then you realize, wait a minute. And this is what he did. He flipped it and he said, God is already speaking to his people. He's speaking to you, just like he speaks to me. He's infused you with the Holy Spirit and spiritual gifts. He's already at work in your life. So now my role is to assess that and who we are in this region, in this county, in this location. And then we create and shape a vision moving forward from there based on what God is already doing in our lives. That is a New Testament model. That's awesome. And that's Acts 6. So there's one more passage I want to give to you. Then I want to get really uncomfortable. Okay? All right, just a heads up, in case it is, but it's not really. Yeah, just making sure you're awake, okay? All right, so this is really, really interesting, this dynamic, and I hope it's valuable to you. But there's another passage that's just really important. It comes from Ephesians chapter 4, and I want you to know that I fully buy into that diagram because part of a pastor's job description is embedded in this text, where the text tells us, this is the Apostle Paul again, saying that Jesus was the one who gathered those 12 around, gathered those apostles, and he gave us the apostles and the prophets and the pastors to make sure they're equipping people for works of service so that the body can be built up as everybody is doing their part to contribute and be a mutual participant. And the idea of equip, which is a big church word, equip, it literally means the exact adjustment in real time, the exact adjustment so all of the individual parts work together in the right or correct order. Isn't that super cool? So let's choose some men, some women, some people who are known to be, and turn this responsibility over to them. So we'll be exploring that as we move forward, but now let's make it real and practical and tangible and give you an opportunity to respond to this in real time and make adjustments. So at one of our town halls several months ago, we were talking about the custodial services here and how expensive it was and trying to cut costs, and we had someone stepping up and just taking full ownership of the building and making sure everything was cleaned. And what I discovered was this individual, along with one other person, they were kind of a tag team, was cleaning every single thing in the building. So I called them up one day to thank them and really discovered that it was a very cumbersome project. Taking that on was just like huge. So let me be real for just a second and then step out of that, okay? Because I don't want you hearing me say something I'm not. So if we can just go ahead and push any indulgence to the side. So I was like, well, what can we do? You know, I'm still sorting out this. And I'm like, where's one of the biggest pressure points of this? And the individual said, oh, well, it's the trash. And I'm like, well, tell me about it. And they're like, well, there's these various locations with the trash, and it's just, if we could move that off the table, it would free a lot up. We'd still be saving the money, and it would free a lot up, and we could execute more. And I'm like, okay, I'll take care of that. I'm here on Friday mornings with the elders every Friday. As soon as we're done, I'll bounce over here, knock it out. So I contacted this individual. I'm like, every time I knock it out, I'm like, hey, this is done. You don't have to worry about it. And I'm chatting with this person. And they're like, to me, it seems like it's no big deal. It literally takes about 16 minutes to do, okay? You're probably, why does he know that? I don't know. I clocked it one time just to see. It took me 16 minutes, and that's been the most common number, 16 minutes to do that. And I kid you not, I don't even think anything else about it. I get in the car and drive off. It's done. And this individual has told me multiple times, most recently a couple of days ago, you have no idea how big of a help this really is. Another person got word that I was doing it. It's like, you don't need to be doing that. And I'm thinking, actually I do. Because sometimes it's really hard for pastors to kind of give back in a non-pastoral way. since we're pastors, we're doing this stuff, but this is a little personal with me too. And I'm like, this is a way where I'm part of Madison Hills, and I'm part of his kingdom, and I'm contributing, and not just in ways that I'm paid to do. So it is different, and it is important for me to be doing this. So I called this individual. I was like, hey, give me a rundown of everything you need to do. Like if you could create a list, bullet point, of the things we need to do to save that money and to get everything clean for the following Sunday, what would it be? And over some time, this individual sent me this list, and I got it here. It was just a really neat rundown. And I thought, okay, well, let me put this here. So I got it on this clipboard here, and we can categorize it to the entryway, like cleaning the glass doors. To some of us, it's like, why would I even bother? Not because you're a bad person, but because it's like, that takes 2 minutes. You're right, 2 minutes. But to someone else, you're saving their time and life and empowering them to do other things. Sweeping and mopping just as needed in that entryway. The auditorium, and I call this room the auditorium. I hope that's not offensive to anyone. I don't say sanctuary. Side note, we'll talk about this some other time. We're the sanctuary and all that deal. So that's why I use auditorium, but we can talk about that if it's a problem for you. But vacuuming. Just vacuuming. The community room, wiping down tables. And sweeping, mopping, vacuuming as needed. And then, and here's your favorite, the bathrooms. So there's 7 of them. I didn't realize that. Did you realize that? 7 bathrooms in this building. I had no idea. I'm thinking 3. I forgot about the downstairs. There's 7 bathrooms. And she categorized them as cleaning the mirrors, sweeping and mopping as need be, and cleaning toilets. And I thought, you know what? And I've told you this before, if I'm learning anything about Madison Hills, it's we are a community where people serve. So if you've got 2 minutes or 16 minutes, this could be one of the most basic and easy entry points for you to take the first step you've ever taken in actually serving at the church you've attended. Nobody's going to be watching you. Nobody's going to be judging you. But you are really going to be making some real-time adjustments so that we're all working together and getting things done. So I'm going to be mingling with you as I always do, but I'm going to be holding this. And I challenge some of you to take your first step and to knock this out, because I guarantee none of these will take too much longer than 16 minutes. We good? Father, I want to thank you for every single face that I've been looking at for the past 30 minutes. These are good people. And I'm having the time of my life here. And I'm so thankful for them. And I'm honored to be their pastor. And I know a lot of people out there love this place. And they want the absolute best for it. Thank you for this dynamic that we have, God. And guide us as we continue to turn responsibilities over to people and allow your kingdom here at Madison Hills to expand. And guide us as we experience growth and we're called to make some real